Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's already 3:01, so just in interest of time, we should get going. So my name is Abhi Deshpande. I'm the Director of Budget and Grants Management. On the behalf of Richland County, I would like to welcome all of you for today's information session for ARPA funding available through the Richland County. Um, uh, just to give a little bit background about this funding, Richland County received around $80 million as an ARPA assistance after after and during the pandemic from the federal government. So out of $80 million, Richland County Council as well as the administration, they worked with the community partners and the community organization in order to determine what are exactly communities' needs and priorities. And they carried out a survey based on responses that we received out of survey. Richland County Council as well as administration leadership decided to allocate the funding for some of the areas that we feel that are important needs for our community. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just myself and my members from my office will give you information about how can you submit your application, as well as we have an expert from our third-party partner, Grant Thornton. She will talk about some of the qualification questions based on your projects, or just like small questions like, do I qualify or not, and how about this expenditure and this expenditure category. So definitely, if you have project-based questions, I would encourage you to have these questions for Sarah Harris. She's our grant expert in this area. So with that, I just want to take a quick moment and introduce some of the staff members from the Budget and Grants Management Office. So we have Matia Pugh. She's our grants manager, and she will go over the Zoom application, the Zoom grants application. How can you fill up this application online? As well as we have Christian Phillips from our office, who is basically a senior grant accountant. So he's kind of a guy that he will oversee the flow of the money once the grant application's been awarded. So and myself, I'm Abhi Deshpande. So with that, to start, as I mentioned, that we decided around $16 million that will be allocated to the community-based organization or projects. Those are focused towards community well-being and the needs. So with that, I'm just going to give you an overview of these allocations, or what we call it funding buckets. The first category is funding for small businesses, which is $1 million. Now, this is the only one category where you don't need a 501c3 certificate to eligible or to apply for this particular funding category. The rest of the categories are for nonprofit organizations where you need actually a 501c3 certificate. So the first category for small business, if you are a legal business entity doing business in Richland County, you're eligible to apply for this funding category. One thing I would like to clarify is that all of these funding categories are only for either a business entity or nonprofit organization. Individual citizens to apply, they are not eligible to apply for individual citizens by themselves to receive these grants. So they will be end user, but they will have to seek these benefits via these nonprofit organizations. The next category is for funding for nonprofit, which is a $1 million. Then the next category is funding for workforce training, which is a $1 million. Now the rest of the workforce below these categories are all the nonprofits who are working in that particular area. So if an organization working in the workforce training area, they will be able to apply in that category. Um, Going forward, funding for education assistance, that's a $1 million. Then funding for senior assistance, that's a $1 million. Now, initially, this category we call like a senior housing repairs category, but we broaden that focus of that particular category. So it's a senior assistance. So it's not only housing repairs. So several different kind of assistance can be eligible for these these projects for this kind of assistance will be eligible for this funding category. The next one is address for food insecurity. That's a $2 million. Then the next one is the broadband services for underserved area. That's $2 million. Then funding for affordable housing. That's $4 million. Then services for unhoused or homeless persons. That's $2 million. And then funding for youth and recreational services. That's $1 million. One thing I would like to add is that any organization can apply for up to 3 categories. So if you're applying in a nonprofit category, and as well as if you're working in senior assistance and educational assistance, you can also apply in those categories. So for up to 3 categories, an organization can apply for. Be mindful or be aware that you need to put 3 different applications if you're putting in 3 different categories. And we'll go over that. Mattia will walk you through about that part as well and the Zoom grants. Also, initially when we opened the grant application program from September 1st, we had initial deadline was September 30th. However, as of Tuesday, this week's Tuesday, we extended that deadline till October 14th. So that's Friday till midnight. So the deadline has been extended for 2 weeks until October 14th. Also, one important thing is like these applications are only based on only electronically submitted applications are accepted. So the paper applications are not allowed at this point or will be not accepted as well. With that, I will turn it over to Mattia Pugh, and she will go over the Zoom grant application as well as any kind of the questions, like some of the questions of the applications. Before that, like, are there any pressing questions at this point that I can answer for? Okay. So if not, Mattia, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mattia Pugh, and I'm a grant manager here at Richland County. So I want to take a little bit of time today to walk you through the Zoom Grants portal, which is where you'll submit your application when you go to apply for the ARPA grant. So that link can be accessed here at the top of the information page. You just click that link, and it'll bring you to the home page for the ARP grant application. Here at the top, you'll see the same information that you see on the information memo, which will tell you about the deadline for applying and the different categories of money that you can apply for. As Abby mentioned, you are able to apply for up to 3 categories, and you will need to submit a separate application for each category that you intend to apply for. And I'm going to show you where. If you scroll down, the first page is your summary. So here's where you'll enter your information as the applicant, as well as information for your organization. basic phone numbers and address and things of that nature. Here in the application title / project name, that's where you'll indicate what pot of money you're applying for. So for example, if you're a small business, in your application title is going to be small business and then put your business name. If you're a nonprofit, your project name. If you are a nonprofit who is interested in workforce training or food insecurity, you would put food insecurity and then your project name. That way we can distinguish between the different applications. Your next page is the application questions. So here you will insert your organization tax filing status, as well as the service type and your process owners. When you scroll down to the next section, your next section is going to be your program and project information. So here's where you're going to insert everything that we'll need to know about the project that you intend to complete. So you're going to want to let us know the who, what, where, when, how, right here in this section. Number 5 says describe the issue, the need that your project will address. And as you scroll down, you'll talk to us a little bit about your services, your current services, and how you are currently meeting needs in the community. And then number 7, you'll talk to us about what you intend to use the funds for. So whatever amount it is that you're asking for, we need to hear about what your plans are for how you plan to meet the need that you are applying for funding for. And there's about 25 questions or so in the application, and all of these are required fields. So you will need to put a response to each question in order to submit your application. Some of these are geared specifically towards nonprofit organizations. If you are a small business applying, you can, to those questions that are specifically for nonprofits, you can insert not applicable because you'll need to submit something in there. The next section, administrative systems. You'll talk about how you will recruit participants. And then one more section on your business and marketing plan and performance measures. I'm going to jump to the required attachments. Just as all the questions in the application are required, you also won't be able to submit your application if you don't upload something for each required attachment. So you're going to need a statement of financial position as well as a statement of activity. So your balance sheet and your income statement. Those apply to both the nonprofits as well as the small businesses. So most organizations should already have those on hand. The detailed project budget, this is where, say, for example, if you ask for $100,000 in your application, this is where you're going to break it down to say, I plan to use $50,000 for this. You're going to break it down into expense categories and let us know exactly how you intend to spend the funding. Next, your IRS determination letter and your proof of current registration. So these are specifically for the nonprofit organizations. However, as a required document, if you have a small business and you're applying, the IRS determination letter, this is where you could upload your business license. So that would be the equivalent for the small businesses. The proof of current registration, this is where you would upload a document with your EIN number and that tax filing information. And then your organization's W-9. The budget page, that is a required field as well, which is also pretty self-explanatory. You will put your expense categories and your different amounts for how you intend to spend your funding. Tables, that is not a required field. However, we encourage you to give as much information as possible. So you would put your information in for fiscal year 2021 and 22 if you fill that part out. So that is pretty much the basics about Zoom grants. Are there any questions on Zoom grants? Yes, sir.
Question on the project budget. Does it allow you to do an Excel piece to put into the project budget, or do you need to develop your own format to that?
So in the budget tab, I think you'll need to insert it into the Zoom grant, so you won't be able to upload and export from the Excel file. But once you put it in your required attachments, where you have to put that detailed project budget, you can upload your Excel file there. Any more questions? Yes.
Is there a certain amount that we could apply for, or we could just go for any amount?
So what we are encouraging people to do is to apply for what is reasonable for what your organization intends to do. So if you have been operating at a certain level up till now, and this is how much it's taken you $75,000 to operate in the past, ask for what is reasonable to maintain those operations and move forward. Yeah, another question? Go ahead. Can we get you in?
Sure, thank you. I guess one quick question is, the projects that we're proposing, are they restricted to just the county, or does that include the city limits of Columbia?
They are restricted to Richland County. So it can be in incorporated and unincorporated areas, which some of that includes city limits, but it's Richland County.
Okay, so even for like, if you propose to do a housing project?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. I have some other questions, but I'll let others.
Some parts, yes, ma'am. So like the incorporated areas.
As long as the project is within the Richland County boundaries, and so definitely that will qualify. Some parts of the city, they may, I'm not sure they not part of the Richland County.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, but if the residents of Richland County may be benefited from that project. So, and I'm sure like Sarah Harris, she can chime in onto that like at some point. But I see that if the residents of Richland County, if they are benefited from that project, that should qualify.
Yes, sir.
So if a project is approved for, say, $50,000, but only $45,000 is used, do those other funds, the $5,000, roll over, or are they given back, or what's the process there?
So these, as most of the grants, these grants are reimbursable. So if that expenditure is not incurred, so we'll and you will have to show us all the receipts and expenditure, and then only we'll cut the check. So even though the project is approved for 50,000, if you're not able to provide us receipts more than, let's say, like 45,000, will not disperse the rest 5,000 without any kind of sufficient documentation.
So you said that these grants are 100%, 100%.
If for the qualifying expenditures. Yeah.
I thought you had more than that.
Anyone else have any more questions?
I'm trying not to manipulate the conversation. For the general not-for-profit category, does the funding support operational costs, or is it programmatic only?
Yep, it does cover the operational cost as well as programmatic. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can talk offline also too afterwards.
I know that with state ARPA funds, there is a time restriction on when the money can be used. Is there any such time restriction for these grant funds?
Yes, there is. So Abby, do you have a?
Please. Let me introduce. She is Sarah Harris. So she is from Grant Thornton, and Grant Thornton is our third-party partner in order to evaluate all the applications, and she has almost over decade of, or maybe 2 decades of experience within the grant and the federal grants and state grants. So with that, I will just turn it over to her. Yes. One thing I would like to, I think, state that if you do not have a Zoom grant account prior to entering any application, you will have to create that Zoom grant application account, and like basically just a login, and then after you will be able to use the Zoom grants.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Again, my name's Sarah Harris. I am with Grant Thornton. We are a third-party financial advisory firm. We are going to be assisting the county with this process. So a lot of the questions, when they start gearing more towards eligibility and criteria, that is where we're here to try to assist you with that process. Okay, so we do know that this particular funding is incredibly diverse right now. There are a lot of different needs that are being met and identified with this particular grant. With operational costs, typically with federal grants, what you will see is usually a 10 to 15% allowance. Now, with this particular funding, the U.S. Treasury guidelines and the federal regulations have not stipulated any areas that are known at this moment for those particular categories. So what you would do is you go through the Zoom grant process, apply as you normally would, and then the federal evaluators further into the process will probably have more additional information that will help to supplement this. So I'm going to go over our scoring rubric, which is what the federal evaluators will be taking a look at. And the county was actually very thoughtful in their thought management process and change management process with these funds, because the community was at the forefront of their mind when they came into this process, okay? And really it inspires me because I'm also a social worker, so I really love our communities. And historically, this is the first time we have seen this amount of funding flowing directly back into our community. So hopefully, I look forward to seeing all of your applications in the system. And so a lot of these eligibility questions, yes, they're on the fence right now because we do not have a lot of federal guidance that distinguishes those areas, but we are working through those things. So I am also going to provide you with my information at the end of this as well. So please call me, email me, whatever you have to do, and we'll get in touch with you to start walking through that application. But I'm going to go over our project summary. So this evaluation process, they're looking at 30 points in this category. Now, the most important thing that you can do as you're going through like question 4 and 5 of your Zoom grant application can really apply to this particular area. And the reason being is with your project summary, you are sharing your personal and professional story about your organization. Now, with ARPA funding, there is a direct link to COVID-19. So you have to ensure that as you think about cause and effect for this particular program that you're applying for funds from, that you tell us, COVID-19 impacted my organization or my business in this specific way. Okay, and I'll give you some examples because I love giving examples, okay? My kid brother has a small business. He has an automotive business. Now, before the pandemic, he had to turn people down for work. But as the pandemic set in, he had so many significant supply chain issues. He could not get parts. So essentially what happened is he had to store vehicles on his parking lot. He started to run out of space on his parking lot. So as an example, if he were to apply for this grant in the project summary, he would tell us that story. He would say, hey, COVID-19 has really impacted me in this way because I have experienced severe supply chain shortages. So that's just one example of many diverse situations that have really emerged because of this pandemic. You know, all of us, it's very relative and it's very subjective to what we've gone through, but that is really what you're going to have to do for us. And let us know, this is the area that has really impacted my services. Yes, sir.
Impacted your services. Could it be the project that you're proposing? Could you say that it COVID impacted the population that we're trying to serve? For example, if you're providing workforce development services, COVID, of course, put a lot of people out of work, forced them to have to find other careers, those kinds of things. Could your project be built around addressing those needs as
Yes.
opposed to how it impacted you directly?
Yes, yes, it definitely could. We know that that has been a problematic area. Another example, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, we've had a lot of small businesses. I worked in government as a public servant for a very long time. So I was there kind of in the trenches when COVID-19 came about, and we saw small businesses that were doing everything they could to keep afloat. And so they cut down workers who were full-time to part-time. Eventually, some had to cut down completely, and they really they lost their businesses as a result of this. So the impact is very diverse. So yes to your answer. Yes, sir. Okay, and so that part leads into your project impact. So I know this is scored at 15 points, but what I would emphasize in your project impact is to ensure that you are stating your solution, okay? You have your cause and effect. COVID-19 did this to my organization. It impacted my operational expenses. I may have lost a lot of money due to COVID-19. In your project impact, you're going to put how all of that impacted you, right? But this is your solution for what has happened, okay? And I will say that with ARPA funding, one thing that's been incredible about this process is actually seeing the innovation in our community. I've spoken with so many people over the course of the last week or two, and I mean, there are businesses that have been born as a result of COVID-19. And so what you'll want to do is really tell us what you believe is the solution for your problem, and it could be very complex, right? There are going to be some grant narratives that are going to be super highly detailed, but it is okay to get straight to the point and tell us in the application, this is my solution. This is, a proven way that I've been able to really help provide services to either the clients I serve or even the business partners that I may have in this process. Okay, so you can also, as you're going through this application as well, if you are piloting a brand new idea and you have a vision for a business, okay, for our small business community that may be here, what you want to do is be very specific. This is almost going to serve as your business plan that you are telling us, this is my plan, and you're going to walk us through it from conception and idea to tell us about your methodologies. Now, what I will say is very important for the overall application is to ensure that you understand every part of federal funding is subject to audit. So you'll see a lot of technical terms inside of this rubric, 2 CFR 200, but what you have to remember, okay, it's all audit. It's a different type of audit, and depending on what threshold you are requesting, those type of audits can impact you. So usually if you're asking for something over $750,000, that actually sparks what is called a single audit. So you'll see that maybe as subpart F in the application rubric. But this serves as a supplement, okay? It's not a hard line. Richland County really wanted to help because Zoom grants may not be the most intuitive system, right? They are going to ask for the basic information about your organization. But this supplement serves as your guide to build a framework as you go through each of these questions to say, okay, the federal government is probably going to be looking for these key areas. Yes, sir. Oh, that's okay.
So you just said something. You just said something that kind of triggered me.
Okay.
So if you put in an application for, let's say, $500,000 in a category that is $1 million, and there are other applications in that category, will you even consider funding less than the required amount, or is it an all or nothing supplication? Is it like, okay, you asked for $500,000, if that doesn't come through, you don't get it, or maybe they'll say something, I'll get $300,000.
That's a good question. So obviously, this is a competitive grant process, okay? And this is usually how grants work. Believe it or not, I have had requests for applications, not with this particular situation, but I've had people who've asked for the top end of a grant threshold. Someone will come in and say, you know what, I'm going for that $1 million. What I would tell you, it's subjective to your organizational needs. You have to apply for what is fair and reasonable. If your operating expenses, like Mattia described earlier, is you are operating from $75,000 annually, and you shoot for $4 million, that's really a stretch. I would say that's a pretty big stretch. So be fair and reasonable to what you need, but also what will happen in the process as they look at all of the qualifying candidates and eligibility and all of the federal criteria that is U.S. Treasury designed for this particular grant. Then they will come back and they will say they may award a different amount than what you requested at the top end, okay? So that is a very normal grant process from local to federal grants. Sometimes we have people that ask for the top end. And also, I would also recommend this. Also, don't ask for the lowest thing either, okay? Because I think that is a question that's come up as well. Be fair and reasonable to your organization, okay? If you know that underscoring a price, that's not going to impact the flow of the evaluation process. It is what it is. If you have operational costs that are X number of dollars, you would need to transpose that into a realistic request in your grant application, okay? So I'm going to go down here to our organizational background. Okay, I'm just going to clear the air on this for a lot of our small businesses. So some of these businesses, like I said, have been born very recently. If it is a new business, I know that organizational background is important as you go through here. Essentially what the federal government is saying is we want to know that if we provide you with grant funding, that you have the ability to manage these funds appropriately. Okay, so there are a lot of new businesses, and I'll give another example. So I had this was a very long time ago, but I had an individual who had this amazing idea to serve children out in rural communities. He was in the tech industry. He really wanted to do something for his community. So he said, I want to apply for this grant. And he actually has this trailer with computers set up. It's basically a mobile computer lab. Well, he started to go through the school district for a grant that was being offered at that time, and one of the administrators was really fully on board and supportive of this venture. So he was a brand new business. We really didn't know if that was something that could be successful, but he had a strong business plan, he had a strong request, and he really spelled it out for his methodologies as he went through there. He was even so specific as going through a pretend budget for his request. So as an example, if he had applied for $20,000, he provided quotes. It's going to take me 10 laptops to set up this service inside of this trailer. How much do 10 laptops typically cost? So he provided a cost analysis in there with all of his quotes. So the more supporting documentation you provide to us, that is a lot better in the overall evaluation process because it's showing us that you are demonstrating that you have the ability to manage the funds for the grant process. So with that being said, for our more seasoned nonprofits or business owners, this grant is also for you to apply, okay? So as you go through, let's just say, for example, you had a loss in funds because people were scared to come to your restaurant. Okay, COVID was in full force, people did not know enough about it, and you may have lost some funds. What you would want to do is start pulling up those bank statements, start pulling up, you could even do a catch-all, okay? We all know that businesses have to file taxes, right? So in your application of Zoom grants where it has FY20, 21, 22, you could pull up your taxes to show, maybe I lost $13,000 in FY20, and I lost another $15,000 in this year. What you're doing is really showing us that cause and effect of COVID-19. So just kind of keep COVID-19 in the back of your mind as you go through the application, because that's what this grant is designed for, is to help you in the event that COVID-19 has really impacted your services that you provide or your business. Maybe I'll also add this in there. If you had a business that you were attempting to start, but you could not start it because of COVID-19, this is a grant you can apply for as well. But be very specific, be very detailed, and make sure that, you mentioned a very good question earlier about the jurisdictional lines between the city and the county. You can't apply for city funds and then also apply for county funds. It's going to be one or the other, okay? So you have to make that determination with your organization. If you happen to fall somewhat within those jurisdictional lines where there may be a little bit of confusion, you have to make that decision on where to fall, because the federal government considers that what they call a DOB, a duplication of benefits. Old grant people like me, we call it double dipping. You can't ask for more money about the same thing from two different areas. So, but that's how that process works. So organizational history, it's just you kind of telling us, how can I manage these funds appropriately? So that really leads into our financial area for the budget. Now, I know this seems really overwhelming, but it's just like if you were having to get all of your documentation together to pay your taxes at the end of the year. You want to make sure that you pull up all the documentation that you think will help substantiate your request, which is really important when you do that. Certainly in the past, I've had sub-grantees or potential applicants that said, I want $1 million. But they don't tell me anything about their organization. They don't tell me if they have anyone, if there's a segregation of duties for accounting practices. Those are things that the government and the federal government particularly will look for. As an example, I've had a few calls that came in. We've had individuals that they are the sole proprietor of their business, which is understandable. And what I'm explaining to them is simply fill out the application that is relative to you and how you manage those processes. And really, if you have an accounting system that you use, if you don't have an accountant on tap, if you use Quicken Books or you use an electronic system to document all of your finances, that is also something that you would want to incorporate into your budget narrative. We need to know that you have the ability to manage grant funding, because the federal government, unfortunately, they are very, very strict. So once you receive that award money, they want to know that it is being spent appropriately. And so there's always, concern of funds being rescinded, but you just want to ensure that you've spent it appropriately from the very start. So that's really how this supplement and this rubric applies to your actual application. And do you have any questions for me? It's okay.
In terms of the operational grant funding period, I see that you all are making, contract awards in December. So the operating period for the grant programs would be January 1st through?
I don't have the particular date on me, but it is, my understanding is about 2 years from that date.
Okay.
And so this particular funding, you do have to expend very quickly. So I will say, if you have construction costs that I worked with construction projects, if it is going to extend 4 or 5 years because of supply chain issues, this is probably not the ideal grant for a project of that nature. But if you know that you can expend these funds very quickly, and I think Mr. Despandi has that date for you.
So the main recipient of this grant is Richland County from the federal government. So we have our own deadline from the federal government to expend this money, commit this money by December of 2024 and expend that money by December 2026. So, however, what we are doing is because at the end of the day, this money is given to Richland County, not to the subrecipients from the federal government's perspective. So we are asking all subrecipient to prepone a kind of forward that deadline by year. So all subrecipient, they have to commit these dollars of their grant by December or expend actually by December 2023 and then December 2024 and commit that by December 2023 to particular projects. So in order and before and after that, they will have to submit the report in sometime around, early 2025, first quarter of 2025. So because we will have to gather all the documentation and submit those back to the federal government. Hence, we are asking on 1 year before when we are required to submit everything back to the federal government. Does that help you?
It does. I was just wondering whether or not it would be reasonable to assume that you would commit, let's say, to a 2-year cycle for a project. Year one might be 2023, year two would be ending in 2024.
Yeah, but that's how. If means, and as Sarah mentioned, that if it is a multi-year project, such as a construction project, that may not be then an ideal situation for seeking this funding. So if the construction project is going for like next 4 to 5 or 5 to 7 years, so that this may not be the ideal funding.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump tracks a little bit. and
Okay,
We've been kind of general. I'm going to be real specific.
okay.
In terms of the difference between operating funds and salary, is there some type of matrix or some type of guidelines to whereas it governs when the money's being spent or allocated that says, okay, this amount is your operating funds and this is an amount to pay salary of the owner or the person in charge?
That's a really good question, and I've received that a few times, and I do like specifics. But right now, at this moment, the U.S. Treasury has not put that guideline in place that we know of. So the recommendation I always have is to ask for it anyways. As you go through the evaluation process and the federal evaluators start taking a look at the criteria, they'll have the most up-to-date information that will apply. Okay, so generally, as a rule of thumb that I have seen with federal grants is usually 10 to 15% for general administration costs, okay? But that is very generous. That is not always the case. Sometimes they'll say 15%, you go through the process, and then they come back and say, no percent. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Don't let that be the only thing that you request in your application. Now, I'll add this in there as well that can be a little bit confusing. If anyone received any payroll protection funding, federal funding, and you request for that for your ARPA funding, that is a disqualifier, okay? So that kind of goes into that double dipping situation I talked about earlier. So if you did receive federal funding in that sense, because this ARPA funding is an extension of COVID-19 funding that has already been issued out into the community from years ago. So the nomenclatures are a little bit different with this one, but they're still a very similar track. So as the U.S. Treasury standards really reflect that this is an extension of the same grants that they gave out initially, but there's a little bit of a tighter control, primarily probably from misuse of funds in the first round that the federal government gave out. But that's okay. I think as long as you are following the rules and you're going through the process with integrity, you'll be okay. You just want to make sure that you fill in all of the information. And I'm going to give you my telephone number. So as you run into any problems, please give me a call, okay? And my name again is Sarah Harris with Grant Thornton. My telephone number is 803-231-3093. Again, that number is 803-231-3093. So just bear with us for a moment because we have a huge influx of calls and everyone's trying to get to everyone. And but I've had some really good questions on eligibility. unfortunately, we don't have a lot of guidance from the U.S. Treasury in terms of very specific things like of that nature. I know payroll is a big one for a lot of people. Can I use this for payroll activities for this? Certainly, the federal government is very strict when it usually comes to payroll, and since they had an initial round of the payroll protection program, they are even more strict now because they've developed some rules. But hopefully, we hope to see more information come down from U.S. Treasury, and really at a lot of levels, there I think is a lot of pressure to expand certain areas. So, as an example, 503Cs. They are allowed to apply for this, but there are also other nonprofit categories that are not 501c3 statuses. So the federal government right now, we hear kind of in the background, is that they are actually really looking to expand those areas. So I know that as a social worker, a lot of the organizations I dealt with were not 501c3s, they're actually 504c3s, right? So those are actually more stringently applied in terms of federal guidance, but they're not actually on this U.S. Treasury criteria. So that's just another example. And so what we're hoping to see is some emerging policies that will help open those areas up. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to confirm that timeline. So from what I understand, the awards will be made in December?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
So the awards would be made in December 2022. So you could, as an organization, put those into effect July 1st, 2023, carry out your programming through 2024, even 2025.
The county has their own date. You really would need to expend those funds by December 2024.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I know that the federal dates that are floating around, especially even on the internet, when you take a look at ARPA funding, they have given counties and local governments the discretion to decide when they want those dates to end. Obviously, when you have such a huge amount of funding flowing into the communities like this, the auditing effort is significant. So that is why there's a little bit of a buffer in those dates.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Are there any special considerations for special demographics? So rural communities or communities that are low income, or are there anything, and should we be taking that into consideration as we're filling out these questions?
Yes, this is a very important question. So this gentleman has talked about our low-income areas. Are there special considerations in this process? The application rubric that you see here is actually designed with communities in mind. You're going to see some technical terms like QCT, that's Qualified Census Tract. Traditionally, we know that in those tracts, we have low to moderate income households. If you serve a community that is vulnerable, if you serve a community that is often marginalized or has any of those topics that we've just talked about, you would just essentially add that into your plan, okay, in your project summary. You would say, these are the clients that I serve. They are of this, and you just list that out for us. Tell us that story, because we know that with COVID-19, there have been a lot of communities severely impacted. I can tell you from just personal experience, volunteering with hospice care, that our elderly community has been heavily impacted by this process as well. In fact, this was another thing that came up, and it really hit home, because during the pandemic, when I was volunteering, we actually had hospital beds that there was a surge in care because we had more elderly that were becoming sick from COVID-19 and the spread. And so these were operational expenses that this nonprofit was they were just not prepared for. And so that would be something, if, they wanted to apply, they would tell that story. But yes, they serve a very vulnerable community. And certainly I worked in school and education, and our children are also a vulnerable community. So if you serve those communities, yes, it's very important to tell us about those populations in your application. And like I said, we've had a really diverse range of different needs that have really emerged from COVID-19. So there's not an area that COVID-19 hasn't really touched, is what I'm saying. So please, share that story with us. Be specific. Add attachments that state your request. And also in the financial area, if you start to really get turned around, give us a call so we can help walk you through it. Any other questions? Okay, so I think that's it, but you have my number now, so give me a call. And like I said, we have an influx of calls. I will do my best to get back with you as soon as possible. Yes, sir? Right now, they haven't released my email address, okay? So I guarantee I will call back at least within 72 hours. We've just had such an influx, and we have a small amount of caretakers for this process, but we are getting through it, okay? But certainly, give me a call at any time. Leave a detailed voice message if you have to, and then I will certainly get back to you as soon as possible. Okay? Well, thank you so much for coming, and I think Mr. Despandi will close this out.
So I hope this session was helpful to answer some of the questions. As Sarah mentioned, that she's available for any ongoing questions as you're working on your applications, as well as we have our budget office's number there as well. So we'll be able to assist with any kind of questions or technical assistance if you need for the Zoom grants. So please feel free to reach out to either Sarah or as well as a number that is on your informational page or even on the Zoom grant for the budget office. With that, I thank you on the behalf of, again, Richland County for coming out today. So this one was our last information session out of the 4 sessions. So again, we look forward to seeing your applications and good luck with the process.